Hello, my name is Ezra Beeman, and you've joined us today for our latest Power Sessions webinar on consumer-centric system planning. Um, we'll first cover the topics that you see before you, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll take questions, but you can drop in your questions at any time. And we'll order them on, we'll answer them or try and answer them on a first come, first served basis. I'm joined today by Sarah Gonzalez, who'll be helping manage the chat, and will also be managing providing a copy of the presentation for all those that attended, and following up with any questions that we may get sent. So today we'll first cover the role of customers in the future energy system, state-of-the-art customer behavior forecasting, digitizing consumers' behavior, load, and resource potential, state-of-the-art and integrated electricity system planning, and then we'll conclude with some key takeaways and recommendations, and some information about our next power session. So first of all, let's talk about the role of customers in the future energy system. I've been following consumer load and behind the meter resource adoption for quite some time, and I think it's never been a more exciting time to be in this business. Now, more than ever before, consumer decisions are really driving the future electricity system, the future energy system. And so it's really important that we have an understanding as to what these decisions look like. So what we have in the top left is a view of an average customer in Victoria at the moment. This is based on published information. You can see that a lot of the load is water heating. Some of it is space heating, keeping in mind that most consumers in Victoria currently use gas. So on average, this is about the amount of consumption on an average winter day in Victoria. Now, the question is, over the next 10 to 20 years, how might this load change? Well, that really depends on what consumers are going to do. Now, some of what they're going to do is going to be driven by what policymakers do in terms of what kinds of appliances can they purchase, and what sort of incentives are involved. As well as what sort of industry responses might there be, which is a combined industry plus regulator sort of response. So what we're trying to show here on the left is, on average right now, the average consumer, the average residential single-family dwelling in Victoria uses just over 6 megawatt hours. Now, if they adopt some energy efficiency over the next planning horizon, or if they buy 8 kilowatts of solar PV, which is pretty much the average in the country at the moment, they adopt 2 electric vehicles, and if they convert the rest of their appliances to electricity, all told, that actually will see them reduce their consumption by about a third. But if they only do some of that, like if they only electrify and they don't use PV, or they only use PV and they don't electrify, it has a very big impact on their actual energy consumption at their home. And on top of it, it has a really big impact as to what their load shape could look like. And what we have here on the right-hand side, bottom right, is what the net load profile would look like for someone who's adopted all of these activities but is not coordinated. Now, moving to the next slide, we can see what happens if those customers were to be coordinated, or also known as orchestrated. And you can see that this particular consumer, when the orchestration is to deliver a highly utilized or high load factor profile, that they could pretty much approximate something that is almost a perfect load profile. And the reason for that, some of it's due to storage, some of it's due to new flexible loads like water heating and charging. Now, any given load has a different impact on peak demand based on the load demand flexibility, and on energy or load energy flexibility. And you can see, pools might use 1 to 2 kilowatts on average, but they can represent quite a bit of kilowatt hours per day. Now, note this is kilowatt hours per day, not megawatt hours per year. And that's because this is the amount of flexibility you might want to actually be using on a given day. So clearly, understanding which appliances are going to be adopted by which customers has a very material effect on the kind of energy system that's needed. And it's also important to note that while these appliances might last 10 to 15 years, the electricity infrastructure that gets deployed lasts for 50 to 70 years, depending on the nature of that asset. So, what is the state of the art in forecasting consumer behavior. Well, we looked recently around the world at some of the leading integrated system plans, including Western Australia, in California for SMUD, Los Angeles, Ireland, New Zealand, and of course the NEM. And what we found with respect to demand side forecasting, when they were looking at minimum and maximum demand or DER uptake, EV uptake, DER being solar and storage for the most part, or appliance uptake, most of the state of the art was in linear regression. And linear regression is really good at projecting the past into the future. Nonlinear regression, a little bit fancier. And then you've got the class of vast diffusion or logit probit models, which are model based. If you have seen sort of an S curve, that's what's characteristic of these kinds of forecasts. ARIMA, those are really good with periodic sort of variables, and they used to be very popular in load forecasting. We've got extreme value theory, which if you're dealing with extremes like peak demand, can be very, very useful. Machine learning, which is all the rage, may take over the whole thing in the future. Agent-based Monte Carlo linear programming. These are all simulation-based techniques, and they're not nearly as popular. Now, that's great. Looks like the industry has a preferred option here. Regression, very transparent. You know what you're getting. Not a lot of work to set up. But the problem is, when the future is not like the past, you can have some pretty poor outcomes. And you can see here, and not to pick on poor AMO, but around 2010, 11, 12, there was a real change in the level of energy in the market every year. And you can see here that in the 2011 ESU, projections were to go this way, and then the next year was projection to go slightly lower, but it was systematically underestimating or overestimating what the future load would be. We had a similar challenge with forecasting EVs, and you can see here a wide range of potential futures and what actually has transpired. And a lot of this, in my view, as a professional forecaster and system modeler, is really due to entering into a period where the future doesn't look like the past. So, one of the things we've looked at recently, is looking at the various types of forecasts, some statistically based, some simulation, some a mix of both, and to look at, what are their applications, linear variables, nonlinear variables, binary variables, optimization, and to also look at how easy are they to actually use, and then how robust are they, right? And what you really want is something that's not too hard to use, but is also robust so that you don't have these biases like resistance to lack of independence, resistance to extraneous variables, resistance to outliers, overfitting, etc. And you can sort of see there's a trade-off. You can have it simple, or you can have it robust, but it's difficult to have both at the same time. Now, this is something that Energeia sort of came to grips with about 10 years ago, and that was during our work on the Smart Grid, Smart City project, where we first started to realize that the existing linear regressions and even vast diffusion and logit models weren't going to get us to where we wanted to go. And we started to investigate an emerging type, at least it was for us, an emerging type of forecasting methodology called agent-based simulation. And you can see here, seems to have a lot of potential applications. It's relatively easy to use and is relatively robust. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about next. So let's talk about the history of agent-based simulation. So the theory or the practice of agent-based simulation is you basically model consumer behavior directly. And you set up a system so that agent or consumer decisions are set up in a way that allows you to, through simple rules, discover emergent behavior, particularly where that behavior might relate to other agent behavior in the system. And so this is an approach to modeling things behind the meter distributed energy resource adoption or EV adoption, or how consumers are going to potentially enroll in programs, and then how they might operate them. You can also use it for other agents like generators in the market, as well as distribution and transmission companies. So it actually is quite a wide applicability. Now, where did it come from? When we did a little bit of background research, and I didn't actually know this when we first started adopting it. We just sort of saw it as one of the potential options out there when we did our research. But it was originally developed by John von Neumann, and with all the media around Oppenheimer. He's I think a little bit in the shadow of that, but he was no less a mathematician, and he was involved in the Manhattan Project as well. Very brilliant polymath. Um, his concept of a machine capable of reproduction was then taken up in the 1970s by Thomas Schelling, who was looking at ways of modeling different kind of socio-demographic behavior, and he first applied it to modeling different demographic patterns. It then in the 1990s got more widely applied, and in 1999 was the first time we've been able to identify when agent-based simulation came to electricity. Now, we didn't pick it up until the 2010s, but we were not alone. You can see there's a number of organizations, particularly in North America, both Energy Lab, but also the California Energy Commission, that have seen the benefits of agent-based simulation, for particularly with consumer behavior behind the meter, where things are it's a really complex environment, one that's the past is maybe not a good predictor of the future, and we need something that can really help us with emergent behavior. What is possible, not what happened in the past. So I won't dwell on this too much, but some of the strengths of agent-based simulation, as I said, emergent properties. It's easy to communicate and understand. It's traceable. You can trace back exactly what happened. There are a bunch of other benefits as well. Now, it does have some weaknesses, like anything. It can be resource intensive to set up, and um, there are not a lot of examples out there that have been really rigorously examined. But these are not fatal in our eyes, and so it is our methodology of choice. So let's talk about how you actually apply agent-based simulation. What is necessary? And it's fundamentally around digitizing the customer base. I think in this industry, there's a lot of attention around digitizing assets. We want to make sure our GIS system is completely up to date, but the next frontier really is around digitizing your customers. What do we mean by that? We mean describing them in a way that allows model their behavior using a technique like agent-based simulation. So one of the key questions is, well, how do you create these agents? Now, these agents need to represent consumers, not in every single way, but in ways that matter for the application. What do we want to know? We want to know what their response is going to be to price increases, rate changes, and also the emergence and availability of other technologies like behind the meter solar, storage, and vehicle charging. And so what we have here is an example whereby different kinds of customer characteristics um, drive different things like the response to pricing, demand management, other kinds of behaviors. And so the defining of what are the most salient characteristics of your consumers with respect to these behaviors you're interested in is the first step. The next step is to then start to pull together what these agents look like. And so the way that we go about doing this is, first of all, you figure out what the properties are of the agents of interest. You then define the kinds of segments that are most of interest, like single family dwelling. That might be a renter, might be, whether or not they're renting or owning. It might be the vintage of the house because it's got different characteristics in terms of its energy efficiency. And then we look to actually estimate not only what that customer's overall load profile is, but what the subloads are, because those subloads drive the economics and the decision making around, should you buy a different kind of appliance that might be electricity instead of gas, or do you buy an appliance that can be controlled? So pulling all this together allows you to then create these agents, and each agent might represent 20, 30,000 of your customers. And part of the art is getting the right balance between the level of complexity of your agent design and the associated sort of time and effort and processing required. So once you've created these agents, you then need to map them to all your customers. And what we're showing here is an example from North America, whereby there was only a certain number of areas that had smart metering data, and yet through all those characteristics and properties, you could still map. And this is just showing a high-level view of neighborhoods, and here's some major thoroughfares. But actually tagging every single premise was then assigned one of the agents to represent them, and then by connecting those premises to network assets, you could actually identify how each agent then contributed to the asset load. 17,520 in terms of a half hourly profile, or 8,760 in North America in terms of their loads and the associated behaviors. So once you've built up something like that, one of the next questions is, okay, well, what is their actual propensity function? How do we know when they're going to actually adopt solar or storage or energy efficiency or an electric vehicle? Now, this is an area we've been working on for quite some time, and we have three different models actually of consumer behavior, and it's really driven by whether or not there's a major investment, because we believe, and we believe the literature supports, people making economic decisions differently if it involves a big investment with a timeline, which is mostly governed by a payback period, or if there's a hassle factor. I could, we know that we're going to save money if we convert from, let's say, electricity to a heat, from a gas to a heat pump. Um, but it's a hassle. Like, you've got to change stuff out. It's not a drop-in replacement. And so, or if somebody's going to come in and swap out your LEDs for something else, it's just a hassle. There's not a big payback. We know it's sort of 2 or 3 years, but yet people don't do it. So that's where we put in a hassle factor function. And then in the case of things like cars, where it's not just about the money, people have their whole identity of what they drive, and so it's a function, at least based on our analysis and history, of what sort of model availability is there. If you want to drive a Ford, you're not gonna drive a Chevy, so that you need a Ford that's an EV before you adopt. And then of course there's, can I save money, or what is the actual cost of making that decision. So just an example, also have to digitize their behavior. Now, the final step, or a step that can be taken at this point, um, is to then, you can do things like, oh, let's add up all the technical potential. Well, if I take all these agents and I can roll up at an asset level from sub 1, sub 2, how much storage they could technically have, and that's on a nameplate basis. We can also calculate what the gigawatt hours are, for example, on an energy basis. And you can do other things. You can look at the what they call the economic potential. How much of this is economic under current conditions? And then we look at other things like market potential. You forecast what the adoption is actually going to be given current settings, and then achievable potential, which is, if you were to tune this with the incentives, mainly with incentives, but also programs, what kind of output could you get? And is it orchestrated? Is it a program, or is it just sort of customers acting independently? So this is where a lot of the, I guess, magic happens when it comes to truly integrated system planning, where the consumer side is just as much a resource as the utility scale side. So let's now then take that segue to the state of the art in integrated system planning. So before we can even have a discussion about what do we mean by integrated system planning, I think it's worth talking about different kinds of system planning. We've got, system, and this actually originally I asked ChatGPT for all the different kinds of system planning, and this was the basis for this summary, right? Which is, you've got um, just the definition of system planning: providing an evidence base of quantitative analysis to guide strategic investment decisions to achieve set objectives, right? There's transmission network planning, there's distribution network planning. Then there is what we call integrated resource planning, which is actually not on here. And it's a term that's mostly used in North America, um, whereby you are doing planning of the transmission and the bulk supply system in an integrated fashion. And there's trade-offs. Transmission is somewhat of a substitute for generation, and vice versa. And then while those two modules or input factors are endogenously modeled, they're part of the modeling process. Other things like consumer behavior and behind the meter load is actually usually fixed, and it doesn't respond to what's going on in transmission and generation. And that's where I think there's an important change between sort of what is best practice in the traditional sense at the moment, and where we're headed to in terms of forward-looking best practice, which is what we call truly integrated system planning, where not only are transmission and generation modeled and responsive, and there's a feedback loop, but you also throw consumers and behind the meter and even the distribution system in there, because both of those, consumers and the distribution system, can provide resources to the other elements of the supply chain. So as another way of portraying this, here we've got an integrated resource plan, transmission and generation. In a truly integrated system plan, though, you bring in load and you bring in distribution as well. And that's sort of getting us the Venn diagram here of being in the middle of all the different potential suppliers of resources and response. So why even bother with this? Well, there's the the only ways we've seen of to try and identify and compare why do a truly integrated system plan is shown here on the left. This is some work that we did in North America. You could see under business as usual with a traditional um, integrated system plan. You've got the network portion of the bill, the generation portion of the bill, and because of more growth of EVs, for example, in the evenings without the demand responsiveness, even under scenarios, you see prices were rising. In a scenario whereby we've got orchestration, we've got consumers adopting efficient levels of behind the meter resources, it was a very different sort of picture. Now, thank you, and I want to call out Mark Patterson for bringing this to my attention. There's been a study in the UK not that long ago, in 2019, which also looked at different kinds of planning methodologies. They're talking about the distribution system operator-centric view of the world and how much they saved. The one that if you're just looking at the transmission system, and then the savings you can get if you actually do something that's truly integrated. So the other thing that we completed recently was I mentioned this review of all the different integrated system plans, and I won't go too much into this. It's in the deck if you want to look at it at length. But I think what's interesting when you really look at it, which of these integrated plans had fixed or scenario-driven customers and resources? It includes the national electricity market. It includes the Western Australian system in the last iteration anyway. The California integrated system plan did include the behind the meter as an integrated resource, but not all of them. The PG&E one didn't quite get there. And then we've got Ireland and the New Zealand examples. So even what we think are some of the leading examples around the world, they're still not including that behind the meter as something that has a feedback loop and actually responds in the planning process to changes in distribution, in transmission and generation. So here we are at the end of the presentation. I think we're going to open up to questions. We've still got a few minutes. We pride ourselves on ending on time, and so we've got about 6 minutes. So in terms of the key takeaways and recommendations, customer behavior regarding equipment and service adoption is critical to grid and system planning. If you get that wrong, you've seen what happens to the forecast, and we're talking billions and billions of dollars that are planned to go into the Australian market, whether it's the NEM or the Swiss and other places. It's really important that we get these forecasts, or at the best of our ability, correct. A lot of the ways that we're currently doing the forecasting is obsolete. The past is not a very good basis for future understanding and system planning. Agent-based simulation is not the only option, but it's one that we've been pretty happy with. It's very powerful, but it does have some particular things that you have to get right around digitizing your customers. And then finally, it's only when the industry moves to truly integrated consumer-centric system planning that we're going to achieve the promise of what system planning is, of getting a least cost outcome for consumers. So in terms of key recommendations then, obviously move to a truly integrated grid and system plan. Have a good look at your consumer behavior and behind the meter resource forecasting methods and consider a move to something like agent-based simulation. And ensure that it's optimized in terms of your own customer characteristics, behavior, and feedback loops. And this is not a non-trivial exercise and something that we've been doing for a long time, and it still takes quite a bit of stakeholder engagement and decision making to come out with the right balance for a particular client. So thank you very much for your attention and participation. Here I've got more information about our power sessions, where you can follow and get more information for our next one. Thank you for those of you that have voted. We've got the results here on the right, but I think we're going to open up to chat now. One question was from Mike. We'll be sharing the slides and a recording of this. Both will actually be shared. Any of the attendees today will get a link, and you're welcome to forward that on. Got a question here from Peter. It says, given all the risks and delays with large transmission, I think customer integration is essential and should be done in parallel to remove risks and utilize a larger workforce. Your work would aid this. I agree, Peter. I mean, having worked for the utility, I can understand why it is so attractive to do a really large asset. It from an organizational complexity point of view, it can appear to be the simpler way forward. However, I think what we've seen over the past 5 years is just how complex and risky larger investments can be. I would say though that we are seeing some of the large investments like the interconnectors moving through and actually being developed. But I also know that there's a huge backlog of connection requests to the transmission system in Australia. So I don't think there's any silver bullets, and you can't put all your eggs in one basket. But certainly those, to the extent we're able to move forward with a more consumer-centric view and to really harness behind the meter as a major asset class, I think it's going to be in the long-term interests of everyone, the community, consumers, and the environment. Any additional? Oh, here we go. Oh, we got another follow-on from Peter. I also think utilities are missing the point on what drives the customer to participate in programs at scale. How can you help them understand the issues to drive mass uptake? Consumers are unique, and in our experience, it's not as easy as just having a single product. I mean, you really have to get into just strong sales and marketing techniques, having lots of different options, not just thinking about the incentive on the consumer, also thinking about the supply chain, looking at encouraging the design engineers as well as the people who are installing more efficient lighting. There's a whole range of techniques. The other thing, and this came from some research from NREL, it's just a lot of times the level of incentive is just not nearly substantial enough to get people's attention. My own experience is the economics that underlie them certainly may require an additional, just another review. Our analysis has suggested there's more incentive that could be put on the table, but it requires pretty good sense of the underlying economics. Okay, we've got another question. Andrew, does more advanced modeling reduce the need for smart meters at every premise? Can you use a handful of metered locations to accurately predict load patterns? My experience is that the answer is yes. It really depends on how accurate you need this to be. Um, if you need to do state estimation and you've got a very, very low tolerance, then you pretty much want to measure everything. But most of the applications that doesn't apply to. You either have a significant amount of thermal inertia in your loads, or just the requirements aren't that great. As you saw in the slides that we presented, we were able to reconstruct the load and consumers of a utility that had about 1.4 million customers off the base of about 30,000 smart metered customers. Was every single one of our load profiles perfect? No. Were they pretty close? Plus or minus 10%, given the sampling that we did? Yes. The power of statistics is pretty strong. Okay, we have another one from Alex. Adding to Peter's point, how much of forecasting is based on what we hope customers will do rather than a full understanding of what they will do? Oh boy, I feel like that's almost into the philosophical. I think one of the things that I tell my people is if we ever do some analysis and modeling and we see the answer that we're expecting, that's where the risks are usually the highest because we want to believe that outcome. And it takes a lot of discipline to force yourself to really challenge that outcome and to truly try and find holes in that outcome. So the forecasts you make that are what you expect often are the ones that are waved through, and they are higher risk as a result. Okay, so here's a question from Mike. How far have you gone in digitizing how consumers use DER, not just adoption? So there's all kinds of elements to the decision process here. One is, we're gonna buy a battery, but the next one is, well, how are we gonna operate that battery? What programs are going to be enrolled in? And when it comes time to EVs, the question is, well, how much, if they're going to let V to G to occur, I mean, how much of your battery are you going to share? I mean, there's a whole range of these things, and they keep emerging, new questions around what people are going to do. So I think that's probably the furthest we've gone, which is trying to anticipate how much a battery will consumers allow you to reduce to ensure they can still get home. And these are questions that some of the projects that Arena has funded, for example, are really helping fill in these gaps, because at the moment we just don't know. Okay, I think I'll see if there's one more question, but I realize we're 2 minutes over and people got to get on to other things. So, okay, we've got a final question from Peter. To roll out a large program to customers behind the meter, what are the key characteristics for the program, such as grow trust, feeling of control, simple? Certainly, simple is really important. So we did a best practice program analysis for a community choice aggregator looking at demand response programs. And again, a lot of it was just the level of the incentive, ensuring that there is a range of options. Some people might want a 2-hour window, some people might want a 4. Just like anything, if you wanted to sell a lot of t-shirts, you've got to make sure that those t-shirts are in a range of sizes and a range of styles. And demand response programs are not terribly much different, and they also have to be good value. I think the trust thing is something that we do have to take note of. But generally, if you aim for the no impact on lifestyle and set and forget, you can't go wrong. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the questions. I appreciate your attendance today, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you at a future webinar. Thank you very much.